Hello team, you missed me. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 11th of January 2024. Let's get to where we normally start. Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Thank you to Davin, I think it was, who provided them for me. They are in the description to this video found below. And we can see that the number of personnel lost is pretty high. Yesterday we saw numbers in the same region, but very low equipment losses. And a few of you were asking, why was that? Why would you still have high personnel losses but low equipment losses? And we can come up with all sorts of speculations to explain that. I do have one bit of information that might go towards that to share with you in a minute. But 830 is not as high as we have seen it during these last few months. But that is, relatively speaking, when you look at the whole length of this war, a very high number of losses for the Russians. 12 tanks is nothing to shrug off easily. That is a lot of tanks to lose in a day. 22 armoured personnel vehicles, likewise, and 15 artillery systems. Not the highest we've had in those categories, but still pretty significant. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 21 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 1 piece of special equipment. Only 1 cruise missile. Last 2 nights, we've not seen any cruise missile or Shahed attacks, really. And I think that suggests that the Russians are unable to fire them on consecutive nights due to issues with stockpiling and production. Although there is claim today that a new shipment, literally a ship full of Shahed drones, has arrived in Russia from Iran. Anyway, those are fairly challenging numbers for the Russians, but not the highest we have seen. When we go to look at Andrew Perpetua's loss list here, we can see that, there's quite a few Ukrainian losses, but still more Russian losses than Ukrainian. And actually, all of those losses appear to come from, or almost all of them, from a single montage video of night vision drones with night vision strikes on boats, probably in the Dnipro River area, maybe Krinky area, maybe elsewhere. A number of these sunk, some of them were damaged, and one destroyed there but not sunk. But yeah, that is a real loss, because there's almost certainly going to be troops on board, either troops going one way to be dropped off, or picking up troops, injured troops, or ones due for rotation, whatever, bring them back. Either way, I think it's unlikely you're going to have empty boats unless they're just moored, and sometimes you do have these moored boats get blown up. So it's not to say all of them were full of troops, but it's likely that most of them were. That will be a big loss. But without those boats, actually, the Ukrainians hardly lost anything. I mean, if you think that's the whole front line, now it's going to skew, as I've said many times, to drone destroyed equipment and not so much in terms of artillery. There's only a couple of Gimler's strikes up the top here. Other than that, there aren't any other examples of artillery destroying equipment, and that's supposed to be destroying, well, these days, supposedly about 60% of the equipment that's taken out. So, yeah, there will be a lot more stuff other than this, and that goes some way to explaining the difference between the general staff figures and these evidenced losses as per Andrew Perpetua. But for the Russians, they lost the Tornado G. It's not the Tornado S. Tornado S, Thierry was pointing out rightly, and I was wondering, I just get confused with Tornado G and S. Tornado S, I believe, is the one that's equivalent to the HIMARS. In fact, has a better range than the HIMARS. That the Russians say, hey, we do have an equivalent to the HIMARS. Yeah, it's only meaningful if you can use them, if you have them, if you have the ammunition for them. And I don't think they have particularly much of either. And so we haven't been seeing them use that piece of kit on any large-scale basis. But they have lost one, as according to Andrew's stats this week. This is another one, I think, a shorter range multiple launch rocket system, if I am correct. Other than that, there's a decoy to be thrown in. First decoy I've seen for a long time for the Russians. Interesting, it's a BM-21 decoy, so a multiple launch rocket system put in the middle of a field, middle of a farm field. That was taken out. But most of the stuff here is trucks, civilian vehicles, Bukankers, sort of Scooby-Doo vans and whatnot. So more stuff lost by the Russians, particularly if you ignore boats, but there'd be no reason to ignore boats. They're just like vehicles on a different, in a different context. We'll move on to get an understanding of how difficult it is for the Ukrainians in terms of losing their own troops. A number of seriously wounded Ukrainian fighters has risen by a third in the past few weeks, according to ABC News, citing a surgeon in Dnipro. The doctor said his team conducts up to 100 surgical operations in a day. Significant part of them are amputations. These are troops that will probably not see the front line again. And a lot of them, Dnipro will probably, almost certainly service the Zaporizhia area like Robotyne, Velika Novosilka, but they have quietened down comparatively speaking over the last few weeks. So this could, therefore, I can imagine Dnipropetrovsk as a city. Dnipro would have people coming in from Dnipro River as well, even though it's a little bit further away than other places like Zaporizhia. You probably got people coming from Novomykhailivka and Mariinka as well, which is a pretty hot area. But the idea is that their statistics have gone up. The Ukrainians are losing more troops every day at the moment than they were, some weeks or months back. Past few weeks has been particularly difficult. But the question is always, okay, it's difficult for the Ukrainians, but is it even more difficult for the Russians? So if the Ukrainian losses have gone up by a third, have the Russian losses gone up by a third as well? And are they still maintaining that ratio in the same way that we look at the vehicles and see that it's usually somewhere between 2 and 7 to 1 Russian losses of equipment to Ukrainian losses, sometimes parity, but then sometimes crazy bad. In the same way, is that the same for personnel? And you would assume it must be. It doesn't have to be, but it could be that Ukrainians are just hammering Russian vehicles more than they are personnel. But you would assume that the ratios are preferable for the Ukrainians, given what we are hearing from Russian sources as much as Ukrainian sources in places like Krinky, in places like Sinkivka and Avdiivka, where it is pretty terrible for the Russians. So actually, let's go and support those speculations with some evidence. On the screenshots, you can see Russian comments on this video. The Ukrainians are killing the Russians at a ratio of 7 to 1, and this is not Ukrainian propaganda, and it can go even higher than that, like in places such as Avdiivka. Now, this is a Russian source talking about an attack on Sinkivka, another attempt today to enter Sinkivka in a small group of 5 people. The video is new. You can see people in the screenshot, the results of the 3 previous attacks. There was an attempt to take a designated house. You can already see what it is, but there is also a car in place, which is satellite film. The result of the attack was 4 of ours, 200, so 4 killed, 1 escaped. The 2 Ukrainians who were in the house are alive. They came out, last screenshot, to finish off ours. In general, as usual, the ratio is 1 to 7. We grind it. So this is the Russians admitting that they're grinding out successes in places like Sinkivka, Avdiivka, but at a loss that is not in their favor. And then here we have I think he's a drone operator, or he's in command and control center at least, near Avdiivka. With a few drones, they killed 1,000 Russians and destroyed 70 vehicles in 2 days. 2 drones, 2 teams stopped an attack of 60 men. One particular time, more than 1,000 units of personnel were killed by as the enemy. And he said as well, we worked on more than 70 units of equipment in 2 days. I can't show you any more of that because it's inappropriate, but again, it's another piece of the jigsaw that we fit into the whole picture to give us an understanding of what is going on. Commander of the 3rd Radio Technical Regiment killed, presumably during recent Storm Shadow strikes in Crimea. Now, we had heard rumours of this. In fact, it might have been partly why there were these rumours of Gerasimov being killed, but there was a high-ranking official that was taken out in the strikes recently on a command node in Crimea. Earlier, other sources mentioned his death before the confirmations appeared. So he's a commander of the 3rd Radio Technical Regiment in Sevastopol, 4th Guards Air and Air Defense Forces Army. So he was taken out. The death of the commander of the 3rd Radio Technical Regiment was mentioned 3 days ago. So, mentioned as a rumor and now confirmed. That's a loss for the Russians. The Ukrainians, of course, there'll be Ukrainian, I'm sure, officers dying as well. It's just, getting evidence of that. Ukrainians captured a Russian mercenary from Somalia near Mariinka. they are picking up their troops from all over the shop. But actually, this is allowing them to mobilize more than they otherwise would. And we'll talk about that in a second, a little bit later. There's another case of Russia on fire, and this is really quite significant. It's a big old fire, 8,000 square meters, not kilometers. Otherwise, that'd be a really big fire. Polymer plant in Obukovo, in the Moscow region, experienced spontaneous combustion on fire. The fire's over 8,000 square meters. Hundreds of emergency workers deployed there. This is again becoming an issue for the Russians, I think, and places like that. You do wonder whether that is a bit of sabotage being involved there, or whether it's an insurance job again. Right, talking about distant strikes, not really much to report in terms of widespread attacks. There was no widespread attack last night. There was just a few S-300s sent into Kharkiv, and again, a journalist's hotel was hit, as it was a week or so ago. The Russians, I don't know whether this is purposeful or whether they're just sending... I mean, you've got three options. They're either sending missiles in indiscriminately, which for me, that's a war crime. So you're just like throwing missiles into the second biggest city in Ukraine, just full of civilians, and you don't really care where they land. Okay, that's a war crime. Or two, you're sending in missiles that you know are inaccurate. S-300s are inaccurate, but you're using them because they're more difficult to shoot down, but their inaccuracy is causing collateral damage that you could argue is a war crime. You're using the wrong weapon for the job. So if you've got more accurate weapons that you know could be used, that you have the ability to use them, but you're not using them, and you're using this weapon that you know can go astray quite easily and hit things like hotels, then that's arguably a war crime as well. The third option is they intended to hit the hotel, which I would argue is a war crime. So none of these options, and those are the only options, because they're using the S-300s here to hit civilian targets they do hit civilian places in Kharkiv. And this is a second journalist hotel that has been hit in Kharkiv recently. So 2 missiles shot across the border, and there were dozens of people injured. I mean, there's at least 13 injured the last count. Kharkiv was hit by S-300s. The mayor confirms a hotel, a house, and a car showroom and a business were badly damaged. A journalist from Turkey is among the injured, I think a Georgian one as well. He was one of 23 guests staying in the Park Hotel, plus 7 employees. Not one military man was there. So make of that what you will. That's the results. That's the burning hotel. And there's lots of other footage. I could play that to you, but you get the idea. On the other hand, there are unconfirmed reports of explosions in Rostov. That is along the same kind of long latitude, isn't it? As Berdyansk, Mariupol, Taganrog, Rostov-on-Don. Now, I don't know, Rostov, that could be the whole oblast as opposed to Rostov-on-Don, the city. Locals say air defense was working, no details. So the Ukrainians had a fairly busy night hitting a number of places. Berdyansk was another one. So here's Berdyansk, Mariupol, Taganrog, and then Rostov-on-Don's over there. So Russian channels report drone activity. And then explosions in Kamensk-Shaktinsky in Russia on the border with occupied Luhansk region. Air defense is active. This I find a little bit, quite interesting, because I do wonder about hitting strategically important targets just within Russia. So you imagine the Russians have pulled back a lot of their logistics, their depots and their storage facilities from occupied regions because of things like HIMARS and the potential of ATACMS. So they're pulling them back into the Russian, the main Russian territories. But of course, then they're not too far away, and they're quite easy to hit with drones that the Ukrainians have now developed to fly further than 84 kilometers of a HIMARS missile. So I think you'll probably start to see a number of targets being taken out just over the border in Russia, and drones, I think, will be doing what ATACMS would otherwise do in the absence of large numbers of ATACMS missiles, as I presume the Ukrainians are waiting for the US funding to be released. Overnight, Russia claims that 3 Ukrainian drones were shot down over Rostov, Tula and Kaluga regions. The MOD made no mention of damage, but the governor of Kaluga admits above the technical structure of a pumping station, a drone explosion occurred. The building was damaged. Reported in a number of places, as you can see there. So Kaluga being hit. These aren't large numbers of drones. I mean, I'm waiting for these drones to be scaled in production, and that will happen. Ukrainians are onto it, and you'll start seeing, I mean, hopefully, if you can get 20 drones a day, something like that, you'd be seeing 20 drones a night, or waiting, stockpile them, and then suddenly you've got 100 drones being sent at night. That's what the Ukrainians want to do. They want to do to the Russians what the Russians did to them, except probably have a greater degree of accuracy and at least intelligence in finding out really meaningful military targets, rather than indiscriminate strikes or trying to take out the energy infrastructure, which I don't think particularly worked well. I think it would be more useful for the Ukrainians to hit military targets. I think that's the most important thing. I think you're there to concentrate on energy infrastructure. I think that would be a bad PR move for them. I mean, there is some kind of utility in it, but I don't think they would get as much utility in that as the Russians would get in hitting the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, which would undermine their ability to produce weaponry and so on and so forth. Russia is such a large country, and their manufacturing industries are so far away up in the north. They've been strategically positioned there to keep them safer. That I think the Ukrainians will end up going far more often for military targets. Now, going on to other bits and pieces here, the deputy head of the GUR, Vadim Skibitsky, has said that 462,000 Russians are now fighting against Ukraine. Their units are 95% manned. This is, I guess, a corrective against the idea that the Russians are being completely degraded from a personnel point of view. Now, what's his agenda here? Is this going to be misinformation? What would be the use, or disinformation? What would be the use of him over exaggerating the troop numbers? Is it to scare Western aid donors into giving more aid, or is this accurate? Is this a realistic appraisal of where the Russian army is at? You've got to remember that the Russians are still recruiting 30,000, arguably, so some are saying 30,000 a day. Now, if you're losing 800 to 1,000 a day, but you are recruiting 1,000 a day, 30,000 a month. If you're recruiting, therefore, 1,000 a day, then you are overcoming your losses. If that is the case, then actually there would be no surprise if Russia was in a fairly robust situation for at least numbers of boots on the ground. The question is, are those boots on the ground just getting sent straight to the front line? So if this is at a replacement rate, then they're doing really well to replace those losses, but they will be having to feed their front line with these green around the gills troops that have very little training at all. In fact, that's what we hear from many Russian sources. So all these questions that come out of stuff like this, to have their units 95% manned is a real challenge for the Ukrainians, because they need to be attriting the Russians along those front lines in an active defense over this winter and spring period, so that the Russians are unable to do that, to regenerate to the required levels. If they are able to regenerate, then the Ukrainians need to be hitting the Russians so that they can't train them. This all about these ratios, both in terms of losses and in terms of gains, as in mobilization. So the Ukrainians are not, I don't think, mobilizing at the rate the Russians are, because the Russians are able to do things that the Ukrainians aren't. So the Russians exist under a dictatorship where no one can criticize, no one can get away with things in a way that you possibly can in Ukraine. And so Putin just says, "Yep, round up all the migrants, illegal or legal. Yep, we're gonna round up all the prisoners, do all these sort of things that he doesn't care about because there are no PR ramifications for a dictator to do things like that. Whereas if Zelensky was to do any controversial measures, then that doesn't go down well. He's thinking so much about what his public perception is and what the polling figures are. Anyway, to kind of I guess, give another view on what might be going on. The wife of a Russian Mobic has discussed it at the news. There will be no rotations. The reaction from a woman was caused by a statement by Deputy Kartopolov, who stated that, and so this seems to be fairly official, there is no need to let go home those mobilized for the SVO, so the war, after a year of service. There are no more protected people in Russia than those mobilized and their families. Yeah, you're so protected that they don't need to be rotated. In her video message, a mobilized wife said, when they are mobilized, they did not have this experience. When Kartopolov believes that everything is fine in our army and those mobilized should not, as it were, rock the boat at all, everything is fine with them, their families are so protected, I suggest that he go to the North Military District Zone and receive the same colossal, simply package of services and the protection of his family that was offered to the mobilized. The woman called for support for sending Kartopolov to the front and indicated that the wives of those mobilized would continue to fight. I have a better idea. Your husband and colleagues should shoot their commander. That would be more effective. So anyway, says PS101. This leads one to believe that maybe they don't have so many troops because they're unable to rotate. I don't know. If you're 95% manned, and surely that means you can effectively rotate your troops. So I don't know. There's something amiss here. Yeah. And then it's just a phenomenal piece of propaganda. By phenomenal, I mean really bad. Andrew Perpetua. Okay, what's happened? There's been a video release. I can't really show it to you, even though there aren't really any dead people in it, and that isn't really blood. But the video's hilarious. I mean, it is that bad. So there's a video doing the rounds from the Russians of supposedly Ukrainian troops dead in the trench and a guy stumbling over dead bodies and then falling down himself and dying. But it's such bad acting. It's terrible. Anyway, Russian propaganda video showing Ukrainians dying. Okay, we know this is false. Why is it false? There is no mud, not even frozen mud. It's totally clean. That trench is the cleanest trench you will ever see. And it's this really weird orange mud that is, there's no tree roots, there's nothing, it's just, there's no rubbish, anyway. Everyone is wearing clean clothing. So you look at the clothing on all these supposedly dead and dying people, it is pristine. The boots are in clean condition. The blood is pink. I mean, it really is. Someone's got a bandage wrapped around his head with this pink, like, it's just, someone's just gone into some really, like, I don't know, primary school play and said, oh, can you put some makeup on for us? Pink rubber band type tourniquets are everywhere. No unit patches, no tape or colour, so no one's got the tape on them. Every Ukrainian I see has tape on them, yellow, green or blue. There's no tape. No bullet casings, no spent ammo of any kind, no magazines. It's just like, and then I added to that it's also really bad acting. Just watch it. So anyway, just be warned when you do see videos like this that, I mean, that's the colour of the blood. It's just pink, bright pink. Look at that clean rifle. Look at that AK-47. It's just pristine. Just, it's terrible. It's such a bad bit of propaganda. And yet, they think maybe it does do a job for their own domestic audience. If you want to believe something, you can. Now, and it's not that I want to believe this. I think the evidence is here for this. I wrote an article on this last year. No, 2022. I think I wrote an article on this, giving all the evidence that Putin is not well. He's not dead yet, of course. Well, there are several Putins. Anyway, watch Putin's body language as he talks about different issues. Putin discusses his career. So this was an interesting discussion anyway. But what's also interesting is the way he holds the chair. Now, he has a habit of holding a desk in weird ways, like that. People presume because it stops his hands shaking. Now, you would never hold a chair backwards like that. That's not a natural position. I've never held a chair like that. You would only do that if you need to do that and you've got nowhere else to hold, given the design of the chair. So therefore, he's holding that for a reason, and the reason has to be something like to steady his hand. There's a lot of thought. There's a lot of evidence to suggest he has Parkinson's. A lot of evidence to suggest he also has cancer. In fact, many people think he's got both. His face gets wider and wider as the years go on because of the steroids to counteract these things. Anyway, I know this sounds conspiratorial, but actually I believe it. I think there's a lot of evidence. He supposedly went to Israel, and this is partly why there's an interesting relationship between Israel and Russia, or has been before it all kicked off. But there are claims that he had the very best medical procedure in Israel for his cancer or for something. But anyway, nonetheless, hey, he's alive, but I don't think he's particularly well. And that's why he was also really reticent to get close to anyone during COVID. And he's still very much like that. So everyone keeps their distance. There's the idea that actually just doesn't want to get any health complications. It's just a whole bunch of evidence. Now, when you compare that to, that's as close as anyone gets to Putin. And then you have good old Zelensky doing the rounds yesterday. So he went to a Ukrainian center in Vilnius, I think. Was that right? In Lithuania. Scared dictators demand distance from the people. Putin meeting real Russian people yesterday. Sing "Don't Stand So Close to Me" versus President Zelensky meeting real people in Lithuania. And here, it was lovely actually to see him interact with the Ukrainian community in Lithuania. Fantastic stuff. He's very good like that, Zelensky. He's a complete polar opposite to Putin. Depends which Putin though. So sometimes you saw that Putin that went to Baratia and he's dead close to people, kissing them on the cheeks and stuff. And then the next day, there's the other Putin at the other end of that very long table or whatever from his generals, and you're like, those two people not only look a bit different, they act. It's about the behavioural differences. Putin says that the Russian economy is now leading in Europe, having overtaken Germany. Really? But really? See how easy it is, guys. The economy couldn't be helped for 20 previous years. All he had to do was start a war. Now everything's sorted. Of course, he has helped the economy. He's helped himself to the economy as the world's most foremost kleptocrat. Yeah. Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned. Vlad plays the Domra while Moscow floods. Okay, I'm going to return to this again. There are just so many more reports of this. And if it's not freezing and not having heat, it's flooding. Possibly because of the freezing. So pipes are bursting. Fire hydrants are bursting, apparently. Residents of elite Moscow residential complexes have begun to massively complain about floods due to broken, it says communications there. I think it means like pipe work. According to eyewitnesses, water is gushing from fire hydrants, drowning elevator shafts, basements and parking lots. So there's a number of videos here, 4 different videos of these kind of more upmarket places being flooded. Then you have more freezing Russians. A major utility failure happened in Novosibirsk. So Novosibirsk is the third biggest Russian city, I think. There's no heating or hot water for over 100 tower blocks. Some streets are flooded because of the problems. So yeah, Tim White's now gone from Russia on fire, hashtag Russia on fire, to hashtag Russia is collapsing. I keep reporting this because I think it is significant. And if you're going to start getting this happening on a massive scale, then you will get a lot of discontent in Russia. And that translates hopefully into, people complaining, protesting and maybe not being happy with the war. Here again, this is another place. This is Omsk, massive electricity outage in Omsk. So you've got this video of the whole, apart from the streetlights, the whole of this city that you can see in this video is out of electricity, and one presumes therefore heating. Not necessarily. I don't know how Omsk is heated though. Omsk, Russia, population over 1 million people. About half of the city has no electricity, according to regional energy minister. An accident at Tavecheskaya substation caused the outage. Russians are ready to freeze without electricity and heat, but continue supporting Putin and a special military operation. This is just, it is, Anton Gerashchenko is just keeping up the constant evidence coming of things falling apart within Russia. Then we go to Tim White reporting that troubling aviation industry issues. Here is, he's got a couple of stories here, but the one I'm going to show you is a big problem for Ural Airlines Airbus A321. An engine failure means Makhachkala to Moscow flight is stuck on the ground for hours. Many passengers heeded the warning and demanded to be let off, refusing to fly. At first, authorities refused, but later relented. So now people themselves are getting a little bit worried about the state of their own airlines. It's just not good. And then Bloomberg, and I talked about this in one of my videos yesterday. There's quite a bit of content came out yesterday. US wants Ukraine to sharpen its plan for fighting Russia's invasion as the war heads into its third year, and is expected to raise the issue with President Zelensky in Davos next week. But this is the chicken and the egg problem. Like, if this is true and the US wants Ukraine to sharpen its plans, right, what are your plans? You can't make decent plans unless you know what equipment you've got. And it's this idea, I discussed this yesterday, that Western allies are saying, we're not going to give you equipment until you give us good plans. And then the Ukrainians say, we can't make good plans until we know what equipment we're going to get. And this kind of dithering and lack of communication about definite equipment deliveries means that we can't make those plans. Yeah, but we can't give you that equipment until we've got those plans. Yeah, but we can't make those plans until you give us the equipment. And so on and so on. It goes on. And so I find this really problematic. They need to be done in concert. The plans need to be delivered in unison with a delivery schedule, a definite delivery schedule. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless in my books. That's the first news piece for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. It's really important you do subscribe. Press the bell, select all on there, and then it just makes sure that the channel gets out there in a time where fewer and fewer people are watching Ukraine war videos. We need to keep it in the public consciousness so that people make the right decisions. I had a few comments yesterday. Someone was saying that they were sharing videos with a friend that was just saying there was nothing on the news at all in the country they lived. I can't remember where it was. I appreciate you spreading my videos, not for my own personal aggrandizement, but to get the message out there so that people do have, hopefully, correct, accurate information about what is going on in light of a lack of mainstream media reporting this. Anyway, take care, everyone. Speak soon.